Okay, you should be able to hear me okay now.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get started.
Stay in step.
Stay in step.
Sounding good.
Sounding good.
Listen up.
Listen up.
Got to learn.
Got to learn.
New cadence.
New cadence.
Here we go.
You can do it.
You can do it.
Listen up.
Listen up.
Stay in step.
Stay in step.
Keep clapping.
Keep clapping.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay, that can mean only one thing, and that one thing is that it's time for David's pick on America's Web Radio, and we had the cadence call going there because, one, I like it, and two, anybody that served knows exactly what a Jody means and knows exactly what it can do for you on that forced march when you've got one more mile to go or 5 more miles to go or whatever it happens to be, and your drill sergeant or your platoon leader starts a Jody up, and it just helps you get a little bit further. We've got a very special guest today, and let me stress how important this gentleman is. One, he's a big supporter of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, but more importantly, in my opinion, he works very hard, and his job has been for many years now, and we're going to let Steve tell us all about it in a few minutes, but he works very hard and very closely with the age group that we look at on many shows. As a matter of fact, we go after the high school kids and young college kids on our classic car show because we want them to pick up the ball and run with it. And Steve is in a position and he does a heck of a job out in Newnan, and he is a history and social studies teacher, and in our talking recently, he's teaching history. He's not rewriting history as so many people want to do today, but he's teaching, and as far as I'm concerned, history is history. So with that being said, we have Mr. Steve Quisenberry on. And Steve, welcome to America's Web Radio. Steve, you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure you're there. Welcome to America's Web Radio. And let's just get started with you and tell us a little bit about what you do. And then we'll really start digging into it and ask all the hard snowball questions.
Yes, sir. I am the chairman of the history department at Newnan High School. I've been at Newnan High School for this coming up year will be my 36th year at Newnan High School. And I lead 17 history teachers, history, social studies, economics, civics, psychology teachers in trying to engage teenagers in the study of history and the social studies.
I guess history has always been one of my favorite subjects, and I did well in it, and I still enjoy history movies and or historic movies and books. I've got Kilmeade's book on, and I grew up in Texas, and we were always taught the Alamo, but Ryan Kilmeade brings in another aspect of it, and so. Okay, so anyway. I bring in, I love history, and let me ask, what's your opinion of rewriting history?
Well, I'm not for rewriting history. Certainly not put that way. There's obviously several ways of looking at it, and that's always been the case. There's always new research going on. I was reading this morning about Alexander the Great and the different places that they speculated he might have been buried because nobody knows where he's at. And so if anybody could find him, that would be quite the coup.
Yeah.
If anybody could actually identify and find the body of Alexander the Great. So there's always things that are changing. A lot of times I teach that some things are just what I call history mystery, based on the History Channel show History Mystery, because we don't know what exactly happened. And so there's a lot of ways to look at it. And if you're looking at judging people in the past by our values and standards of today, you're going to be very disappointed because sometimes it's just unbelievable what people have done to each other and to the environment and to a lot of other things in the past that we would be horrified by today. So it's an interesting subject. I think it's really, I feel like I've got an advantage over like an English or math teacher because what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a story. And there's probably going to be some good guys in it, and there's probably going to be some bad guys in it. And, it's just like going to the movies.
Wow, what an approach. I love it. I love it. The, you were talking about the good and the bad, and I've never had the opportunity to travel in the Middle East, but I took it hurt me personally when the Taliban and ISIS and all that were tearing the monuments or blowing up the different statues and throughout the Middle East that had been there for thousands of years, and it was like a frontal offense to me, in that what they tore up, I'll never be able to see now.
I agree. And I know a lot of some of that was Buddhist, if I recall right. And even though I'm not Buddhist, I thought it was terrible as well because those things were so old and a part of their history. So that was a shame.
And what's happened today in our country is a shame. And my gut feeling is, and this goes not on your shoulders, but it goes back to our country in a lot of ways, and what we've let slip through our fingers over the last few years, is the statues that have been torn down. I doubt if most of those people tearing them down even knew who they were. And certainly most of them, or not most, but some of them certainly had nothing to do with racism or anything else other than just being history. And again, I guess my Texas Tech degree doesn't give me enough brain power to understand what the thinking is there.
Yeah, I agree. The one, there was a couple of them I was really surprised at. General Grant.
Yeah.
I really shook my head and scratched it on that one. I can't follow that at all. And even Columbus.
Yeah.
And I'm not a huge Columbus fan. He did what he did, but he was a man of that time. He was not unusual for that time. My critique of Columbus is, after having read a fair amount about him, is that I question his leadership. And I won't go into all those kind of details, but I said earlier, if you judge Columbus by today, he was a terrible person. But 500 years ago, he was just regular, generally speaking, a regular guy.
Yeah.
And didn't do anything more unusual than anybody else did 500 years ago. So.
Let me ask you, did I miss the boat on what I just said about most of the terrorists, they missed the history class?
Say that again?
What I said a minute ago is the terrorists of today that tore down the Columbus and tore down Grant and what did they miss history class, or did they? They're all, or I say they're all. I don't know, but they would seem to be at least in their late teens, most of them, and did that history teacher just not instill in those people how important the statues are?
Hard to say. I really have no idea. I won't even try to speak for their experience, so I just don't know.
I just, it's just sick because I, not only from my standpoint, I've been very fortunate, and as a youth or young adult, got to travel in many of the states and have seen many of the statues that they've torn down. And I feel very sorry for my kids and grandkids that will never be able to see them. And some will be replaced, but some may never be replaced. And, is what's going on today, and I'm sure I've related this story too many times, actually, but this pandemic has reminded me in many ways of, I was working for a station when Kennedy was assassinated, and my first thought was, well, no, it's a big deal, but it's not that big a deal because our general manager will just go to his bookshelf and pull down a book that says, here's what you do when a president is assassinated. Well, there wasn't one, and again, that's exactly where we are with the pandemic today. And I would guarantee you there will be a lot of books written about it, but there's not one, there was not one for, here's what you do during a pandemic at a radio station. And so, or for any business for that matter. And so I would say there are a lot of authors or wannabe authors that are busily sitting at the computer, or I know they're not using pen and paper anymore, but writing away about the effects of a pandemic. And so what do you think history will do with the pandemic?
It's hard to say, because we got to get some years away from it so that we can look back. But the thing is, it's not unusual in history. Disease has been one of the problems of mankind since they started settling in villages and domesticated animals. And I'm sure you've heard about 100 years ago, the influenza.
Sure, the 1917 or whatever it was.
That, throughout history, the plague, smallpox, a wide variety of things that we have conquered over the years. I feel like, in a way, as we kind of think that science and medicine can take care of almost everything. Not everything. Can't completely take care of cancer. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But, people throughout most of history have had to deal with horrible, horrible, horrible diseases, and have really didn't even know where they came from, and or how they got them. And so, in that sense, we're very fortunate to be able to figure out, these different things that we're trying to do to a vaccination, which hopefully will come along here at some point, social distancing, face mask, all these kind of things that you hear about all the time. Most of history, people didn't know those things.
Right.
They didn't know where it came from.
Well, the other thing that I keep again throwing in, and I tell you, I'm going to hold a thought, and we'll come back. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back with Stephen right after a couple of messages. Stay tuned.
Mortgage, Ellen Deal with Ideal Solutions is here to help. Whether you're a small business owner, individual, family, or baby boomer, email maga45cag@gmail.com, and I'll respond with 3 easy questions to help you determine
Steve, how are we doing?
Get away from Obamacare.
Pretty good, I hope.
Yeah,
I mean, are you,
industry, I'm here to help with all your
am I messing you up in any way?
Ellen Deal at
No.
maga45cag@gmail.com.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
Oh, no. Am I messing you up in any way?
Oh, absolutely not. Like I said, I love history, and we'll get back into it very shortly. Okay.
Okay.
Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the americasbroadcastnetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back on America's Web Radio with our guest, Steve Quisenberry. And am I saying your last name correctly, Steve? Quisenberry?
Close enough.
Okay.
I'll pretty much take anything.
And a call for dinner, too, right?
That's right.
Okay. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about was the one thing that obviously back in 1917, and really, it goes for everything. You can't compare today to yesterday per se, because we've got a terrible thing that has been thrown into it, and that's called social media and the computer. So it has definitely put a different hue on the on anything, and I think this is one of the things that the books that are written will address. And I guess our first instant historical coverage of an event was the Vietnam War, and there wasn't a lot of live coverage, but it was almost live coverage, as the film crews would do the videotapes and then put them on a jet, and they were back in the United States in less than a day, and so that was as close to on the scene as you could get almost. But I guess every historical event has a writer and describing what's going on, and that's where we get our history from.
Mm-hmm.
Am I off base?
I didn't catch that last part.
Okay. Am I off base as far as every event has someone writing about it, and it may be in poetry, it may be in literature, or it may go straight to a history book, but somebody has, or every event has a recording, basically. And we just have upped the ante with our social media and our computer coverage and so forth.
I agree. And a lot of times, the things that come out immediately afterward usually have some inaccuracies. It's not till down the road, several years, if not tens and 20s and 30s of years, before you can really get the whole picture of what happened, because whether it be the government not releasing that information for a while or whatever, we know a lot more about World War II today than the people that lived during it or, right after it.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of that stuff, say the code breaking, for example, wasn't released for years later, and we didn't really know in 1950 about the code breaking that went on in World War II. So it usually depends, I think, a lot of times on how long the writing has taken place. The impact of social media, I think that's still yet to be determined, because that stuff, it's instant. You can find out things instantly, which is, in some ways, is good, but in some ways isn't so good. So there's always advantages and disadvantages with almost everything that we invent or create or do.
Sure. It's you're talking about World War II. My father was in the Navy in Intel, an officer, and to the day he died, he wouldn't tell us, or at that point we didn't ask or weren't asking, but growing up we'd ask, and he wouldn't tell. He wouldn't say what he did exactly, and he found out later that what he was doing had stayed classified, and part of it may have been on some of the code breaking and so forth, but I can't say for sure because he never told us. But I know he was he spent his first tour when he joined the Navy as an officer. His first tour was in Boston at Harvard, and they were teaching him whatever he was supposed to be doing, you know. So it was there again. It was an interesting time. Let me ask. I'm sitting here thinking about what you do, and gosh, my hat is off to you. How would you size up the kids today as far as their interest in history, and how are they taking to the pandemic and to some of the terrorism?
Kids, in general, history is the older you get, the more you appreciate it. Okay, and that I think that's the way it's been for forever. The older you get, the more you look back and appreciate it. But having said that, there are a lot of teenagers that are very interested in history. We have elective classes in our department at Newnan High School, one of which I teach on the Vietnam War in the 1960s, and a colleague of mine teaches one on World War II, and they are always full. The students enjoy learning because those kind of classes, if you go to U.S. history or world history, that's pretty general, you know. Imagine trying to cover world history in, a few weeks in a semester. And so you hit what I always say is the ESPN version of world history. You turn on ESPN, you don't get the whole football game, you get the highlights. And that's what you get in world history or American history for that matter. But if you go to a class like on World War II or Vietnam or any other topic, then you can get even in more detail. And we don't have any problem filling those classes. In fact, we bring in guys that were involved and to share their experiences during that time in class. And the students, they really enjoy hearing about those guys' experiences, asking them questions. Sometimes, they surprise me because I would not say they're questioning, asking penetrating, intelligent questions is their strong suit. And over time, I've kind of blamed the teachers, the education system for that, because you got 30 kids in a class, it's more like sit down and be quiet, and this is what we're going to do because you don't have time for a lot of questions. So I think we've trained them that way, but sometimes they'll come up with some questions that I am just amazed at. Really, and I think I never thought of that. That's a great question. And so I don't think you should sell them short. Certainly not all the students are that into history, but a lot of it depends on the teachers. And we tell a story, and we've got to sell the story. It's almost like being a salesman, and we've got to make the sale. And sometimes we will, and sometimes we won't. We just hope we do a vast majority of the time. And I think our department does do that. Face-to-face with the students, we're as good as it gets. We're as good as any other history department in Georgia, I feel like. And the kids really like it, and we try to engage them in a lot of different ways. And, I've enjoyed it. I'm getting ready to start year number 36.
I think that's great.
Place.
Let me ask,
I've enjoyed it.
With what you've said about, and I certainly appreciate the kids that take the, you could almost call them specialty classes, Vietnam War time or World War II or whatever. But at the same token, do you feel like there's some influence from the home? And for instance, right now, high school or a teenager that would take one of the classes, they might have some old guy like me that was, as a grandfather, that was during the Vietnam War era, or their grandfather may have served in Vietnam. The mother and father probably did not, and a good chance out of only 1% of the population ever joining the military today. I would assume that most kids come from families that have no military experience.
That's correct. But they're interested in what those guys went through. They've heard about it. They've seen, probably seen movies or maybe saw pieces of shows on television enough to kind of pique their interest. And because those classes do some really unique things with veterans, that gets them interested. And, one of the ways that we recruit is by students talking to each other. That's our best way of recruiting.
Word of mouth.
Because the students that have had the class will say, "Oh, you ought to take it."
That's good.
That's our big recruiting tool right there.
That's super. Okay, we're going to take another break, and when we get back, I got one of those really hardball questions for you. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back talking about our kids and history right after this.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mike Karuchak. Have you ever wondered what doctors talk about?
When we get back, Steve, I was going to ask you, do the kids realize that they're living in history right now?
Thursday morning, 8 to 9 a.m.
Good question.
Kyle Hayes, a motorsports student at Alpha State College.
Do the kids realize that they're living history right now? As is everyone every day, but this is more so than we've had in the past, obviously.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I haven't seen them since March. I haven't seen any students.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Well,
I don't know, but I remember 9/11.
Yeah. Okay, we're coming back.
AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back on America's Web Radio with a very special guest, Steve Quisenberry, and Steve's a big supporter of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and I always want to give them a plug, as well as the director, Rick White, retired colonel, and Paul Lungry, that started it, and they have done a marvelous job. If you're not familiar with it, it's downtown Atlanta, right across the street from the Capitol in the Floyd building. And if you're coming to Atlanta or you're living in Atlanta and got kids, it would be a perfect day outing. And the Floyd building, I always give them credit for having a very good cafeteria. You ever eaten there, Steve?
Actually, I have.
Pretty good, wasn't it?
Yes.
So anyway, and the other place that I like to give certainly honorable mention, and I'm sure you're well aware of this as well, Steve, is the Johns Creek, where I live, Johns Creek Healing Wall, which is a 50% replica of the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C. The Healing Wall, what Johns Creek has put up, was toured all over the country, so veterans and people that couldn't get to Washington would at least have an opportunity to see what the memorial looked like in D.C. So, and it's open now, and people are welcome to come to Johns Creek, and they will be putting up a kiosk soon that will have a computer in it. You can type in a name and find out exactly where it's located on the wall. So, and I got to mention too, Peachtree Corners has a memorial to Vietnam veterans, and we're becoming quite a state of memorials. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Yes, sir.
And I think it's great. And whoever's listening, and we have a lot of out-of-town listeners that, please put it on your tour to go to these different places that I mentioned. And I had promised that when we came back, and I sort of cheated because I told Steve what I was going to ask him, and I guess because I have no kids, but I have kids, but they're out of school now, and but I asked Steve, if the kids today realized that they were living in a historical time that will be written about for years to come, and talked about for years to come, bad and worse in some ways. And then Steve came back and said, well, he hadn't seen the kids. Well, what about were you all doing the electronic classes and so forth?
We were, but we didn't really, not like we may be doing this fall, where we were face-to-face very much on the video chat. But I will say that I suspect that they do realize, because this is like nothing they've ever seen. I was in school when 9/11 occurred back in 2001. I was in school when communism collapsed, and I was in school during Desert Storm, Desert Shield activities, and the students, I think, realized at that time that this was going to be something that their kids were going to see in the history book. So I suspect, even though I have not actually been in front of a class since March, that they do realize that this is so unusual that this will be something. And as a matter of fact, some of them that I have seen in the community, I've told them, I say, when your child graduates, you can say, let me tell you about my graduation. Or
lack thereof.
Like, oh, yeah, I guess I can. So I think I feel bad that the end of the year stuff that a senior usually is involved in did not happen, but they've got a really unusual story in the future.
Oh, and as I said earlier, don't you think not hundreds, but probably thousands of books will be written about it?
Yes, very likely.
2020 will go down, and it's even going down right now in more records. I heard today that we've already surpassed the early hurricane number, and which I find interesting. It's like we're just a lot of firsts in 2020.
Yeah, certainly is.
But anyway, tell us about. I found it interesting when we were talking too about what you all do with getting what's it called when you have the veterans and the kids get together?
Yeah, we call it Student Vet Connect, and this is our oldest program. We trace it back to 1995, the last year of the 50th anniversary, I should say, of World War II, the ending of World War II, and we had an event at the school where we were going to honor World War II veterans, and of course there were quite a few in 1995 that were still around, and a handful of them, 7 or 8 of them, brought in some memorabilia and set up displays in a room, a good-sized room just off from our auditorium. And one of the assistant principals asked if I wanted to bring my class down there and look and talk to the guys. And we did, and when we left, they thought it was great, and I thought, why in the heck don't we do that, every year? And so we went from that 7 or 8 guys to now we actually hold this event in the National Guard Armory, which is right across the street from the school, and we usually have about 70 to 75 local veterans from World War II all the way to the present day that come in. They may set up some memorabilia, displays, stuff like that about their time in service, and then we bring the students in. And it's not like somebody's going to stand up there in front of everybody and talk for 20 minutes or 40 minutes or anything like that. It's brief. You stop by the guy's table, you talk to him maybe 5 minutes, 6 minutes, something like that, and then you move on to somebody else. And so you get these brief little snatches of history. But what we want to do is make sure the students understand that these are real people that did these things that we're talking about. You know, a lot of times I'll use the example, how interesting would it be if you lived next door to Leonardo da Vinci, you know, or you were in Caesar's army. How cool would that be to talk to somebody that was like that, or if you were there and somebody wanted to talk to you? But now you get a chance. And, of course, the handful of World War II vets, in 1999 I had 45 World War II vets that came.
Wow.
Last December was the last time we held this. I had 5, and I felt fortunate to have them. And all the students want to see them. All the students want to talk about their first, you know, I told them you can't all go to the World War II guys right off the bat. But they all want to talk to a World War II guy because they realize, and they've seen enough stuff and they've heard enough about it in school, they realize just how big a historical event that was. And they all want to shake the hands of a World War II vet.
You know, correct me. Oh, please correct me if I'm wrong, and most of the time I am. But it always seemed to me like, and I guess it was because Hitler was so well known at that time, that the European theater got much more attention, even though we were brought into World War II because of the attack on Pearl Harbor. But it seemed to me growing up that the European theater always got more attention than the Pacific theater. Is that an unfair statement?
I don't think so. I think you're absolutely correct. I think Hitler as a historical character, interests, I don't want to say that they like him or anything. I'm not saying that, but he draws interest a little bit more than the Japanese leaders ever did for the Americans. So, yeah, I would say so. Plus the fact that for many Americans there, they can trace their roots back to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that also plays a little bit of a part in it as well. So there's a little bit more interesting characters as far as enemy characters in Europe. And so, yeah, I would agree with that, even though, as we try to teach them, the Pacific War was some nasty stuff, some really bad stuff over there. And so we try to teach both sides of the conflict, Pacific and Atlantic.
And as strange as, and I'm sure you remember this, but I can remember I think it went even into the 60s that Japanese soldiers were still being captured in the Philippines and in other Pacific areas where they'd been hiding out. They didn't even know the war had ended. And
yeah, that went into the 70s.
Did it? I didn't realize it went that far.
Yeah, it went into the early 70s. Certainly.
But that unto itself, I think, is just. Can you imagine that today?
No. And I actually mentioned that in class, and they are stunned. I show them a couple of pictures of guys that surrendered in the, some in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but I think the last ones came out in the 70s. I could be wrong on that, but I know it went up until the 70s.
Wow. I didn't remember that, but I did remember the 60s. And, it was like, even then it was like, wait a second, how could they not know? And they had lived off the land and in the cave, I guess, so long that there was no communication. They had none. And
yeah.
It amazed me that, and in some ways the war continued. And as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story.
Yes, indeed.
Historians are, well, we have few real historians on and we have few news people. We have a lot of opinionators on what's called news today, but we've always heard, and I'm sure you bring this up in your classes at some point or the other, and I'd be curious how you do it, and that is that if you don't know history, you're doomed to have it repeat itself.
Yeah, I start with that.
Oh, okay.
That's the first thing we do in my class is why are we studying history? And so that's one of the things that we talk about. So certainly that's where I start, and I try to bring stuff back to those reasons we're studying history as we go through the course.
Like I said, I have my degree from Texas Tech, and but I think, would there be any chance that an old man like me could come take your course?
I don't think they would approve that. Sorry.
Oh, well, I'd sure like to enroll, and I'd like to take your Vietnam and World War II classes. Do you put them on videotape where you could sell me a tape of them?
No, I'm afraid not. Though we have videoed some of the speakers that come in.
Do you know of any other district that, be it Georgia or any place else in the country, that's doing what you do?
There's two other high schools in our county, and one of them has copied the Vietnam class and is teaching it. I don't feel like they do quite to the extent that we do. We are a 50th anniversary commemorative partner with the Department of Defense for the Vietnam War, and so we bring a speaker in every year for the community having to do with the Vietnam War. So they don't go to that extent. We do a 5K to help local veterans, and we've raised $60,000 in 5 years to help local veterans that need help.
Now, wait a second. When do you do the 5K?
Excuse me?
When do you do the 5K?
We usually do it in November.
Okay. Well, you do me a favor, and I'm going to hold you to this.
Okay.
Will you send me something about the 5K, say mid to late October, so I can start pushing it for you?
I certainly will.
Good. I'd appreciate it. And we want everybody to know about it and everybody to take advantage of it. And one of our number one objectives is taking care of our vets. And I just a little personal thing that I've never seen even today, but when World War II broke out, my father had already graduated from college and was a success. He owned a lumber yard in Brownfield, Texas, and December the 8th, I think, he put his lumber yard and house, and my mother had just had my older sister, and but Dad put the house and the lumber yard up for sale and moved my mother and my sister back in with my mother's parents, and they bought another house close to my mother's parents, and then he joined the Navy and was off. And here, I would have thought, and we saw a little bit of it in 9/11, but not the extent that it happened after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and that was that patriotism did not only get a shot in the arm, it got a shot every place. And giving up a business like my dad did, I marveled at, and he was a smart man, but I marveled at him doing that.
Yeah, that's why they call him the greatest generation.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. And and it's sad that we're losing them. I've forgotten what the number is, but daily, and I don't even know how many are left that served in World War II. But it is, and their stories are so incredible. And I, normally speaking, and you're not a vet, correct?
Correct. I'm not.
I will normally, well, you've been around enough veterans at this time. You can certainly answer the question. I always ask my guests, can you name one veteran that can only tell one story?
No.
They all got a pocket full of them, don't they? And I love them.
They do.
And you get in a group of them, and then you start the one-up game, you know.
That's right.
I love it. I love it. It is fantastic, and we, as a country, as a citizen of Atlanta, as a citizen of Georgia, how much we appreciate, and you know, I'm very, very fortunate to have made so many acquaintances, veteran acquaintances, and it's just, they're all neat, and they all serve for a different reason, and they all did things that they were called on to do. And it's sort of like, a lot of people don't know this story, but it's sort of like we have veterans that do shows here, and we've had one situation that a retired general was called up for the pandemic, and he was mentioned the other day, not by name, just by rank, because he's head of logistics for the pandemic in Washington. And you know, you ask a veteran, you never have to ask them but once. And I don't know a veteran in any shape that if he or she was asked to go back in the service, wouldn't go back in. They might have to be pushing their walker, but they'd still go back in.
Yes.
And I
agree.
I hope that comes across to your kids, and I'm sure if it doesn't, you beat it into them one way or the other. No, but you know, it's just something that we have it like no other country in the world. We're going to take our last break, and we'll come back and finish out the show with Stephen Quesinberry right after this.
Hello, this is Michael Daly with Atlanta Healing Center. We know that addiction is a brain disease. Addiction is a family disease. Addiction is a treatable disease. We have a caring professional staff with over 30 years experience to help you and your loved ones.
So, Steve, we okay?
You can reach us at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
I'm going to come back early, so we'll be coming right back.
Network.com. Thank you for listening.
And we're back on America's Web Radio, and David's pick, and my pick today was a gentleman that I highly respect and admire for what he's doing in his classrooms at Newnan High School here in Georgia, and that is that he's teaching history, and I love history, and he's making it understandable and interesting. And from what he's saying, and I can't imagine that no matter what the age, that the kids love hearing, like he said, it's a story that he talks about, and it's a true story that he talks about, because that's what history is. And you know, we're living in a very historical time, in my opinion. Every morning that we wake up right now, and I hope that it never repeats itself, and that we'll learn enough from what we're going through, that, and our kids will, that they'll be prepared. So, what have I missed, Steve?
Well, let me tell you a few other things that we're doing at Newnan High School to try to engage students in history. How about that?
Yes, sir. I'd love it.
All right. So we started a history club about 6 years ago. We've been named one of the top clubs in the country for 5 years in a row, and we had the largest history club in the country for about 3 years in a row. And we try to get the students involved in stuff outside the classroom, from things as easy as history escape rooms, to field trips, local field trips, to speakers and things like that. And we've had as many as 175 students that joined History Club. We also have a History Bowl team that competes against other history, kind of like an academic bowl type team. And our History Bowl team has been to nationals for three years in a row. They went to the national competition.
Wow.
We also have done a lot with the history of Newnan High School, which is an interesting piece as well, because we can trace the history of that school to 1888.
Wow. That's incredible.
The school, the building that I work in at Newnan High School was built in 1952. Or that's when it was opened. It was built in 51, 52. And, of course, we've added a bunch of buildings since then. And the place where the earlier Newnan High School is now a park dedicated to local veterans. And it has a stone there that says the site of Newnan High School from like 1920-something to 1952. And so we think that's really cool. The History Club did a project on the history of Newnan High School where we did oral histories with people, and people donated items, whether it be like a letter sweater from the 1950s, stuff like that. And it was really cool. I've got diplomas from Newnan High School dating all the way back to 1918.
Wow.
And I'm still, some of the people just said, you can keep it, which we, of course, we did, and we do displays on the history of Newnan High School as well. We also, we have hosted a Civics Day where local government leaders come in and talk to our civics students about government and democracy and things like that. So you have like the mayor and the sheriff and the district attorney, these the state representative and the state senator. Our state senator graduated from Newnan High School.
Let me add.
So we've had those guys come in and talk to students about their job, what they do, and how to get involved.
Do your kids understand that we're not a democracy?
Well, yes, we do talk about that, of course.
Good.
But the idea, the democratic principles.
Right.
So yes, they do.
Good.
And I shouldn't have used that word. You're absolutely correct, but it's pretty common. So I know we're not a democracy.
Well, no, and I didn't mean I wasn't correcting you. I was just asking because so many people don't. I mean,
right.
The average man on the street says we live in a democracy. Well, and actually, I've made the statement many times that we really live in a democratic republic dictatorship. Well, we don't live in a dictatorship. Well, if you go back to when our Constitution was written, which I think is one of the greatest documents ever, we had representatives from Texas and different places across the country going up to a foreign land called Philadelphia at the time. It wasn't even D.C. And they would go up and make laws, and they'd go back to their states and counties and cities and dictate what had been decided in Philadelphia. It wasn't, people didn't get to vote on it. They got to, and there wasn't instant news, so it was really, in its own way, a dictatorship, a representative dictatorship. And if you didn't like what your congressman came back and said you'd be doing, then you voted him out.
Right.
But, and I don't mean we really had a dictatorship, but we really, you didn't have then, obviously, because of travel and electronics and everything else. It wasn't a matter that everybody knew what was going on in Philadelphia and then Washington, D.C. We were told what we were going to do.
Right. Well, interesting take on that.
But that's, and in many ways, we're lucky, and the representatives were probably lucky they survived at the time, but, we had our own form of taxation without representation, in that we would send Joe Blow up to this foreign country called Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he'd come back and he'd say, well, we raised taxes on you, Steve, and here's what we came up with a federal income tax, or we came up with this or with that. And you had to live under it until you could either elect somebody else and they would help change it, or you lived under it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'll tell you what drives me nuts is hearing people say, well, the Constitution says that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I just, shake my head.
Yep. Well, and so many people have, there's separation of church and state. It's in the Constitution. No, it's not. Never was, never will be. Mm-hmm. But, and this is why, two things. One, will you come back and be back on again in the near future? And possibly, I'd even like to talk to you about maybe bringing a couple of your students. That's one thing. The other thing is that you hold a first with America's Web Radio and David's Pick. As of today, you're the first guest that I've ever had on that's made me mad. And I don't know what to do about it, but when you said I couldn't enroll in your class, that really upset me. I'd just like to go back to high school and hear what you have to say. And you didn't just say no. You said not only no, but no. And I didn't have a teacher like you, and I'd sure like to get your views on our past days, particularly now since I've lived through them.
Yeah.
So anyway, Steve, it's been great having you on, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And I think I know our listeners will have enjoyed it and will enjoy it as we. I hope you know that we'll be archiving this very shortly today, later today, and it will be up on our website and also on iTunes, and can be heard on any of the podcast servers across the country. And we hope that you'll, however you want to use it, if I haven't said anything too bad, you can play it back for your students if you want to, or just anything you want to do with it. We welcome you to do it, and would like to, we will be in touch about you coming back. And if you wouldn't throw a saber or anything like that at an old man walking in the back door of your class, would you?
I would not.
Okay. By the way, I have a lot of interesting Japanese swords and a Japanese rifle that my dad brought back from Japan. So anyhow, we're going to have to put the plug in the jug and move on out of here and get ready for Ron's show, that Ron Bachman, talking about insurance. And Stephen, thank you so very much for being on. I've loved every minute of it.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you having me on.
Well, you're a welcome guest anytime, and if please, you did promise that you'd let me know about the 5K.
I will.
Okay. Thank you for listening, folks, and we'll be back next week with another guest talking about veterans and the military and this, that, or the other. And we appreciate you listening, and have a good day.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Steve, you still there?
I'm still here.
Well, I just wanted to, normally I'd call, but since you're still there, I just wanted to thank you again so much for being on, and I think it's what you're doing is great, and you're touching our future every day, and that's super.
I appreciate it.
Well, I will be in touch.
Okay.
All righty. Take care.
Whether
Thanks.
you're a small
Bye.
business owner, individual, family, or baby boomer, email maga45cag@gmail.com, and I'll respond with 3 easy questions to help you determine if you can get away from Obamacare. As a 20-year veteran of the insurance industry, I'm here to help with all your insurance needs. Email ellendeal@maga45cag@gmail.com.